Modesto, California. Christmas Eve 2002. A city of 200,000 people in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley, where the land is flat and agricultural, and the air in December carries the particular cold of inland California. Not the wet cold of the coast, not the dry cold of the mountains, but something in between. A gray, settled chill that sits in the valley and does not move. The streets of Modesto in late December are decorated for the holidays. Lights on the houses, wreaths on the doors. The particular atmosphere of a community in the middle of its most domestic season. Families gathered, tables set, the ordinary rituals of the end of the year playing out behind closed doors across the city. It is the kind of city where people know their neighbors, where the disappearance of a pregnant woman on Christmas Eve is not something that gets filed away and forgotten, where people pay attention. On the morning of December 24, 2002, a 27-year-old woman named Laci Peterson left her home on Covina Avenue and was never seen alive again. She was 8 months pregnant. Her son, a boy she and her husband had already named Connor, was due in just a few weeks. She had been shopping for the baby. She had been preparing for Christmas. She had been, by every account of everyone who knew her, a woman living exactly the life she had wanted. A beautiful home, a pregnancy she was visibly, genuinely joyful about, a husband she had loved since college, a future arriving on schedule. She was 27 years old. She had done nothing to deserve what was about to happen to her. To understand the Scott Peterson case, you need to understand who Laci Peterson was. Not as a victim, as a person. She had grown up in Modesto, in the particular way of people who grow up in a place and choose to stay. Not because they couldn't leave, but because the place suited them, because the people were there, because home meant something. She was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, someone who lit up a room. Not in the vague, generic way that people describe the dead out of kindness, but in the specific way that particular people actually do. She remembered details about people's lives, asked follow-up questions, made you feel that the conversation you were having with her was the conversation she most wanted to be having. She had studied ornamental horticulture at Cal Poly, which is where she met Scott Peterson. They had married in 2000. She had a warmth that her friends and family described as effortless, the kind of person who hosted dinner parties and made everyone feel welcome and sent handwritten thank you notes and showed up when people needed her. She worked as a substitute teacher. She volunteered. She had a dog named Mackenzie who she walked every morning through the neighborhood. When she became pregnant, people who knew her said she seemed happier than they had ever seen her. She had painted the nursery. She had chosen a name. She had, in the way of women 8 months into a wanted pregnancy, already begun to organize her life around the person who was coming. She disappeared on the morning she was supposed to bring a dish to a Christmas Eve party at her neighbor's house. The dish was still in the refrigerator when police arrived. Her husband's name was Scott Peterson, 30 years old, good-looking in the particular way that photographs well, square jaw, easy smile, the kind of face that reads as trustworthy on first impression. He sold fertilizer for a living, agricultural products to farms in the valley, which required him to drive long distances and keep irregular hours and be, frequently, away from home. He was charming. His co-workers liked him. His neighbors liked him. His in-laws had liked him, at least in the beginning, though Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, would later describe a quality in Scott that she had noticed but not known how to name. A smoothness, a surface without friction, a man who agreed with whatever you said and gave nothing back. On the morning of December 24th, Scott Peterson told police that he had driven 90 miles to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Alone. On Christmas Eve, in cold weather. He had launched his newly purchased boat, a boat he had bought recently and had not told Laci about, a detail that would become significant, into the San Francisco Bay, and spent the morning fishing for sturgeon. He said he had returned home in the early afternoon to find the house empty, his wife gone, the front door unlocked, their dog in the backyard with his leash still on. He said he did not know where she was. He called her mother. He reported her missing. The investigation began. What the investigation found, in the days and weeks that followed, was a picture that did not fit the image Scott Peterson had presented to the world. Laci Peterson had told friends that Scott had purchased a boat recently, and she hadn't known about it. A boat bought in secret, in cash, weeks before his pregnant wife disappeared. A boat he took to the exact stretch of San Francisco Bay where her body would eventually be found. 4 days after Laci disappeared, investigators discovered that Scott Peterson had been having an affair. Her name was Amber Frey. She was a massage therapist in Fresno. She had been dating Scott since November 2002, 6 weeks before Laci disappeared. She did not know he was married. She did not know his wife was 8 months pregnant. When Amber Frey saw news coverage of the missing pregnant woman and recognized the husband as the man she had been dating, she went to the police. What followed was one of the most extraordinary sequences in the history of American criminal investigation. At the request of detectives, Amber Frey continued to speak with Scott Peterson on the phone. Recorded conversations, dozens of them, conducted while the search for his missing wife was playing out on national television. In those calls, Scott Peterson told Amber Frey that he was in Paris for New Year's Eve. He was not in Paris. He was in Modesto, giving interviews to television cameras, standing in front of candlelight vigils for his missing wife, crying on cue for the cameras. He told Amber Frey he loved her. He told her he missed her. He told her he would be with her soon. His wife had been missing for 2 weeks. The search for Laci Peterson became a national story almost immediately. Her face was on television every day. Her mother, Sharon Rocha, gave press conferences that were almost unbearable to watch. A woman in the specific agony of someone who does not yet know the worst, but already, in some part of herself, suspects it. Volunteers searched the fields and waterways around Modesto. Tips came in from across the country. Scott Peterson gave interviews. He appeared on television. He cried. He spoke about his missing wife in the particular way of a grieving husband. Present tense sometimes, past tense sometimes, the kind of grammatical uncertainty that the truly bereaved exhibit, and that, in retrospect, investigators noted as something else. He said he had told Laci about the affair before she disappeared, and that she had forgiven him. This was disputed by everyone who knew her. He continued to call Amber Frey. The recorded calls were played at his trial. One of them, made while Scott was standing near a vigil for his missing wife. You can hear the crowd in the background, the candles, the people praying for Laci to come home. He told Amber Frey that he was in Paris, near the Eiffel Tower, watching the New Year's celebration. The crowd in the background was his neighbors, gathered in front of his house, hoping for news of his wife. He wished Amber a Happy New Year. On April 13, 2003, the body of a male fetus washed ashore on the east shore of San Francisco Bay, near Richmond. The umbilical cord was still attached. On April 14, 1 day later, the badly decomposed body of a woman washed ashore nearby. The body was headless. The hands were missing. The feet were missing. The decomposition was consistent with months of submersion in the bay. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already suspected. The woman was Laci Peterson. The baby was Connor. They had been found less than 2 miles from where Scott Peterson said he had been fishing on Christmas Eve. Scott Peterson was arrested on April 18, 2003, in La Jolla, California. He had driven south from Modesto. He had dyed his hair blonde. He had grown a goatee. He was carrying his brother's identification. He had approximately $15,000 in cash, camping equipment, multiple cell phones, and Viagra. In his car were also his golf clubs and a map to Amber Frey's house. He was not, it appeared, a man who had been expecting to be caught. The trial of Scott Peterson began in June 2004 and lasted 5 months. It was televised. It was watched by millions of people. It had the particular quality of American criminal trials that become cultural events, a quality of theater, of characters, of a narrative that people followed the way they follow a series, waiting for each new development. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial. There was no murder weapon. There was no crime scene. There was no witness. What there was, presented over weeks of testimony, was a pattern. The affair with Amber Frey. The secret boat. The fishing trip to the exact location where the bodies were found. The hair found on the boat that matched Laci's. The cement anchors Scott had made in his warehouse in the weeks before Christmas. anchors that investigators believed had been used to weigh down the body. The life insurance policy on Laci worth $250,000 that Scott had inquired about in the weeks before she disappeared. And the calls to Amber Frey played in open court. The voice of a man whose pregnant wife had been missing for weeks, standing near a candlelight vigil for her return, telling his girlfriend he was in Paris. The jury deliberated for 7 days. On November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder for the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder for the death of Connor Peterson. He was sentenced to death. In 2021, his death sentence was overturned on procedural grounds related to jury selection. He was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated at a California state prison. He has maintained in every statement he has made since his arrest that he did not kill his wife, that he loved her, that he does not know what happened to her. There is a particular kind of cruelty in what Scott Peterson did that goes beyond the act itself. He did not simply kill Laci Peterson. He killed her and then stood in front of cameras and performed grief for her. He made phone calls to the woman he was having an affair with while his neighbors held candles and prayed for his wife to come home. He dyed his hair and packed camping equipment and drove south with his brother's ID in his pocket. And even then, even in that car, with that cash, with that map to Amber Frey's house, he might have believed, in the way that certain people believe things that are demonstrably not true, that he would find a way through. He had always found a way through. He had always been charming enough, smooth enough, present enough on the surface to make people believe the version of himself he was presenting. It had worked his entire life. There was no particular reason, from inside the logic of a person like Scott Peterson, to believe it would stop working now. It stopped working. Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, the woman who had stood in front of cameras for months while her daughter was missing, who had watched her son-in-law perform grief beside her, who had not yet known what she would later know, gave a victim impact statement at Scott Peterson's sentencing that is still, 20 years later, difficult to read in full. She spoke about Laci, about who she was, about the Christmas she never came home for, and all the Christmases after, about Connor, who was never born, who had a name and a painted nursery, and a mother who had been joyful about his arrival. She addressed Scott Peterson directly. She said what needed to be said. She said it clearly, and on the record, and in a room full of people. Laci Peterson was 27 years old when she died. She had a dog named Mackenzie, and a nursery she had painted herself, and a dish she was bringing to a Christmas Eve party that was still in her refrigerator when police arrived. She had friends who have spent 20 years keeping her memory alive, making sure that the story of who she was does not get entirely swallowed by the story of how she died. Scott Peterson was never born. He had a name. That is something. It is not enough, but it is something. The case of Scott Peterson is often discussed in terms of what it revealed about the limits of circumstantial evidence, about media coverage of criminal trials, about the performance of grief and the ways we read innocence and guilt on the faces of the people in front of us. These are legitimate discussions. They are not the most important thing about this case. The most important thing about this case is Laci Peterson, a woman who loved her family and her neighborhood and her dog and her life, and who was 8 months pregnant and happy, and who made a dish for a Christmas party and never arrived. The most important thing is that she deserved better, from the man she married, from the systems that took months to build a case, from culture that, for a period, seemed more interested in the spectacle of the trial than in the woman who made it necessary. She deserved better. She did not get it. And the least we can do 20 years later is remember her name first, before his. The questions this case leaves behind are not comfortable ones. They are questions about the faces we present to the world and the faces we keep hidden, about the performance of love and grief and the impossibility, most of the time, of knowing the difference from the outside, about what it means to share a life with someone and discover that the person you shared it with was never entirely there. And they are questions about what we owe the dead, about whose story this is, about whether the long machinery of trials and appeals and media coverage and true crime documentaries serves the people who were lost, or only the people who are still here to watch. Laci Peterson. Say her name first. What do you think? Was justice served? Leave your verdict in the comments. Subscribe to Family Crimes for a new case every week. Because the darkest secrets hide at home.